Good afternoon. My name is Lynn O'Connell, and I am board chair of Together Women Rise. Welcome to this afternoon's event, International Women Day. It's wonderful to see so many of our members here, leaders, boards, staff, and volunteers from all across the United States, and representatives from our grantee organizations from around the world. Special thanks to any of you who are new and with us for the first time. You are already part of our community just by being here with us today. So we welcome you, and we're very glad you joined. Together Women Rise is dedicated to achieving global gender equality so that every woman and girl has the opportunity to live freely, pursue her dreams, and reach her full potential. Because we know that when women and girls are treated equally, they help create a healthier, safer, more peaceful, and economically just world for everyone. Today, we have hundreds of local chapters across the United States, many of whom are represented right here in this webinar tonight. Each of our chapters is unique, but together, we are learning about the challenges facing women and girls living in extreme poverty. We are giving grants to fund projects in low-income countries, and we are forging connections with each other and with women all around the world. To show the breadth of who's here today, I invite each of you to go down to the toolbar and click on chat and tell us who you are and where you're from. We'd love to know. International Women's Day is a special day, recognizing the many achievements of women around the world. And the month of March is, as you probably know, Women's History Month. It could not be a better time for Together Women Rise to introduce and welcome a new CEO, Beverly Frances Gibson, who joined us just this past week on March 1st. Beverly has more than 25 years of experience serving nonprofits and community foundations, including her most recent role as president and CEO of the Sickle Cell Disease Foundation based in Maryland. Beverly has worked on behalf of women and girls throughout her entire life, both professionally and personally. Just a few of the highlights from her resume. She served on Duke University's Women's Service Advisory Council, was part of a women's delegation through the Sister Cities program, and was a featured speaker at the 63rd session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. I encourage you to go to the Together Women Rise website and read her full bio. And I just add personally that on behalf of the board, we are so grateful to have her here, and we are so excited to see where we go in the years ahead as we move to the next level and continue to grow our impact for women and girls. Beverly, I invite you to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you all of you for joining us today from around the world. I am so excited to have joined this amazing organization, as Lynn said, on March 1st. And I spent my first week at our headquarters in Greenville, South Carolina, meeting with the staff and learning more about the work that this amazing organization has done. I look forward to meeting all of you, if not virtually, but face to face, and looking forward to the work that we're going to do together. I am thrilled to be joining the speakers and our guest musical artists today. and look forward to a rich conversation, because I think that is the forefront and the impetus for why this event is being held on International Women's Day. So again, thank you for the warm welcome. I look forward to meeting all of you and working with you in the days and months to come. Lynn?
Thank you, Beverly. We know that exciting things are definitely ahead for us with you at the helm. Now it's time to turn to today's program. We have 3 fantastic speakers here today, and we'll have the opportunity to hear from each of them. And then Together Women Rise's Director of Grants and Partnerships, Dr. Veena Kanka, will lead them in a panel discussion. After that, our speakers will take some of your questions, which you can also put in the chat just as you put in your name and where you're from. And finally, we have an exciting wrap up with some very special music from singer-songwriter Joy Zimmerman. Now, months and months ago, when we considered the theme for this year's event, it was evident there seemed to be one key issue on everyone's mind: the COVID-19 global pandemic. All of us, everyone has been impacted by the pandemic. But of course, women and girls, especially those in low-income countries, have been perhaps most impacted. COVID has been disastrous. After the gains in gender equality that were made in past years, the setbacks are just devastating. Even after the pandemic is contained, women and girls will be impacted for years to come, according to the research. This is happening at a time when women are already disproportionately impacted by other global challenges. Speaking of which, I'd be remiss if I did not mention the situation in Ukraine. Just over a week ago, women and girls in Ukraine began fleeing for their lives. Women giving birth had to move to basements in hospitals, and our hearts are with them as we go forward. Again, at Together Women Rise, we're here to work on all of this and do what we can for women and girls, those most vulnerable and those most in need. Today, we're going to talk about these challenges, but we're also going to talk about the reasons and why there is hope. Women are strong. Women are resilient. They are not passive victims of these challenges. There are many inspiring examples of how women are fighting back and being effective and creating lasting solutions. We're going to hear about some of those over the next hour. First, we're going to take a look at the broad view of how the pandemic has impacted women and girls around the world. Where are we exactly in terms of gender equality, which is goal number 5 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals? Where are we in terms of reaching this goal? Well, we are very pleased to have with us someone who has all the data and will lay it out for us now. Jeanette Ascona is Research and Data Policy Specialist at UN Women, the UN entity dedicated to gender equality and the empowerment of women. Jeanette manages the data and statistics for many of UN Women's flagship reports, including From Insight to Action, Gender Equality in the Wake of COVID-19. Prior to joining UN Women, Jeanette was part of the research and writing team for the UN Development Program's Human Development Report Office. Jeanette, we're eager to hear more. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you all for including me on this amazing event today. It's a great honor to be here with you all today. I believe, Wendy, you're going to be sharing the screen and the slides, so I'll wait for that. And hopefully, perfect. I think it's just needs a second for all of the slides to come in. Okay, great. Well, let me get started. Thank you again. The materials that I'm going to cover today do not paint a happy picture, I'm very sorry to say. Women and girls around the world are facing many challenges, but the hope is that by raising awareness of these challenges, we can work together to address them. So with that, let's start with the numbers. If we can go to the next slide. Goal 1 of the Sustainable Development Goals focuses on eradicating poverty everywhere around the world. And unfortunately, extreme poverty globally is on the rise. The total number of women and girls living on less than $1.90 a day is estimated to be 388 million in 2022. The outlook could be far worse. In a high damage scenario, right? Where we see increases in inequality around the world, where we see women and girls not being prioritized in terms of policies and programming, the number could balloon to 446 million, nearly 500 million women living on less than $1.90 a day. That's in comparison to men and boys, so 446 million compared to 427 million men and boys. Women and girls are more vulnerable, and that's an issue that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed now. We can change this. We've done some work looking at different policy scenarios and what it would take to change this trend. We did this work in collaboration with UNDP and the University of Denver, and find that 150 million women and girls could emerge from extreme poverty by 2030 if governments implement a comprehensive strategy. And here I really want to emphasize comprehensive. You know, one policy alone, kind of focusing on extended social transfers, for example, is not going to cut it. We need to really think big in terms of how we're going to address these issues. And it requires improving access to education. It requires investing in family planning services. It requires addressing kind of long, issues that, have plagued countries rich and poor, equal pay for equal work. And as I said, extending social transfers. If we go to the next slide. Women have also suffered steeper job losses than men, along with increased unpaid care burdens at home. In 2020, the number of employed women declined by 54 million, and 45 million left the labor force altogether. Many of them were working moms, right? Moms that all of a sudden found themselves being the teacher, the main caregiver of young children, and having to juggle all of these different responsibilities. Made it very, very difficult for them to stay in their paid work. In fact, more than 2 million women with small children at home left the labor force altogether in 2020, according to our latest figures. This is an issue that we saw across countries. We go to the next slide. This slide is another further illustration of what I was just mentioning in terms of the impact on women's economic opportunity. As you see on the left panel, this is the labor force participation of prime age, right? So women kind of 25 to 54 working with small children at home, part of a coupled household. And we saw that the trend had been kind of a slow and steady increase in terms of labor force participation. But we can see really a quite dramatic drop in 2020 in terms of women's participation in this very particular subgroup of working mothers. So I wanted to emphasize kind of with the numbers what this really looks like at the global level. If we go to the next slide. We see a similar worsening situation in the area of food security. An estimated 811 million people went hungry in 2020, an increase of 160 million over 2019. Women report facing more food insecurity than men, even when they have the same income and education levels. But here too, I want to say that this can be reversed, including by supporting women small-scale producers who typically earn far less than men through increased funding, training, and of course, critically important, land right reform. We go to the next slide. Disruptions in essential health services due to COVID-19 are also taking a tragic toll. According to UNFPA, in the first year of the pandemic, there were an estimated 1.4 million additional unintended pregnancies in lower and middle income countries. Cross-country data from UN Women's Rapid Gender Assessment, so we conducted some surveys last year to really understand kind of the different impacts that the crisis was having on women and girls, including health impacts. And we actually found an increase in mental and emotional stress, no surprise there. Up to 71% of young women aged 18 to 24 said they experienced mental and or emotional stress in 2020. And that compares to 59% of young men of the same age group. We're also monitoring very closely the inequality in access to COVID-19 vaccines. In most countries, women and men have equal access to vaccines, but not in all. In some countries, there are large inequalities in access to vaccines, but also in access to information about these vaccines, which contribute to kind of the gender gap that we're seeing there. If we go to the next slide. At the height of the pandemic, many countries opted for distance learning, but students from the poorest communities have little access to the internet and to other equipment such as tablets, et cetera, even to more traditional forms of communication such as television and radio, which in many countries was being used to continue children's lessons when the schools were closed. We know from past health crises that when schools close, we see increases in risk of violence, exploitation, and early marriage. And unfortunately, that is something that we're seeing in terms of increases in early marriage, et cetera. More efforts are needed to ensure progress in education does not fall back. This is an area that before the pandemic, we actually have seen really some significant improvement, right? Kind of in the aggregate, much higher numbers of girls in school. And unfortunately, there's a real worry that this is going to be kind of reversed and has been reversed. Girls from marginalized communities in particular need more support. And yet too few countries have taken proactive measures to support girls returning to school. As you can see in the slide, less than half of countries, in fact, say that they've taken proactive measures to ensure that girls are returning to schools at the same rate as boys. If we go to the next slide. The intersecting vulnerabilities of migrant, refugee, and internally displaced women and girls have intensified in the wake of the pandemic. By the end of 2020, 26 million people had fled their countries and become refugees, the highest level ever recorded. Almost half are women and girls. The conflict in Ukraine has made, of course, matters worse. Over 1 million Ukrainians, the vast majority women and girls, have fled to neighboring countries. Another 160,000 have been internally displaced across Ukraine amid frigid winter temperatures. Women migrants, we know from data, oftentimes face higher rates of sexual violence in transit to their destination. In 2020, for example, up to 53% of women traveling along the Western and Central Mediterranean routes reported experiencing or witnessing violence. You can go to the next slide. Reported violence against women and girls, we've been referring to it as a shadow pandemic to COVID-19, have increased in many parts of the world. This slide presents findings from data that we collected last year in 13 countries. And here you can see nearly 1 in 2 women reported that they or a woman they knew had experienced a form of violence since COVID-19. Many countries reported, actually, we also asked countries, what are you doing about this? And many said that they were doing a lot, that they were implementing different laws and programs to address the increase in violence against women. But more efforts are needed, including more and flexible funding for women's rights organizations. They often are the first responders in situations like this. But we also really have been emphasizing the need to train police and to train kind of justice system actors who oftentimes are also really key in ensuring that women and girls are getting the services that they need. You can go to the next slide. Under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the global community committed to achieving gender equality by 2030. That's goal 5 of the SDGs. But an assessment of progress to date tells us that the world is not on track to achieve the goal. The distance remaining to achieve gender equality is long, and time is frankly too short. In 2 critical areas for women's empowerment, time spent in unpaid care and domestic work, and kind of equalizing the time that women and men spent in this important area, and decision-making regarding sexual and reproductive health, right? Women having a say in these issues. These are kind of core areas that we're monitoring as part of SDG 5, and are areas where at the moment, countries are far from where they need to be. The assessment actually indicates that the world is far from achieving this target. In other areas, for example, eliminating discriminatory laws and ending harmful practices like FGM and child marriage, progress has been seen, but it has been moderate. And moderate progress is deeply insufficient if we're to achieve SDG 5 by 2030. It's also important to remember, and I'm really happy to see the diversity in the participants that we have today. The SDGs are a global commitment. We all have a role to play here. And unless progress is accelerated by all in countries rich and poor, the entire global community will fail to achieve SDG 5. And so really emphasizing again that it's not progress in some areas and not in others, but really in order to achieve this lofty goal, we need to be doing it together and we need to be seeing progress across all dimensions. We can go to the next slide. We have the tools to address this, right? To promote gender equality and to address kind of the issues we're seeing with the pandemic. And we need more efforts here. So let's give a few examples before we conclude, right? Introduce economic support packages, particularly for vulnerable women, women who've experienced, significant kind of negative impacts in terms of their access to paid work. Increase policies and programs that support equal caring of children at home and that support working mothers. Recognize, reduce, and redistribute the increased burden of unpaid care and domestic work within the home, but also across society. Prioritize preventions and redress of violence against women and girls in COVID-19 responses, and ensure that services for survivors are deemed essential and remain accessible and adequately funded. These are just as important as all of the other kind of interventions that are being promoted to address the pandemic. Close glaring gaps in social protection. In response to the pandemic, only 54 out of 195 countries and territories have introduced new or amended social protection measures targeting women and girls. Many more are needed. Long-term investments in social protection systems that reach all women and girls are key to an economic recovery and a future that is resilient to some of these shocks, right? Eliminate inequality in the labor market. This is more urgent than ever, including by addressing occupational segregation, by addressing the gender pay gap, and making sure that women and men, that parents equally have access to quality and affordable childcare. And protect women's health and well-being, including ensuring that they have access to sexual and reproductive health services. So just a few examples of some of the things that we've been promoting with our work in conversations with governments and others. If we can go to the next slide. So to learn more, I do encourage you to have a look at our SDG report, Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Gender Snapshot. I've given you a little taste of what's included in the report. We actually look at all of the goals, including the climate-related goals from a gender perspective. It's the only report within the UN system that does this, right? Oftentimes governments and others look at the SDGs and think that, goal 5 is the only one that's relevant for gender equality. And in fact, in order to achieve all of the goals, the goal on poverty, the goal on economic growth, et cetera, we need to do this from a gender perspective, ensuring that everyone is benefiting from progress. If we can go to the next slide. Just very quickly, visit kind of dataunwomen.org for some of the other publications that we have on the SDGs if you're interested. We also have a data portal that has all of this data that I mentioned today. The link is data.unwomen.org. So if you want to know more and kind of dig into some of the data at the country level, that's available on those various kind of reports and links. And maybe I'll leave you with the last slide, which is a link to some of the other publications that we've been producing here at UN Women to bring visibility to the fact that crises are never gender neutral. Oftentimes they have a distinct impact on women and girls, and we need to bring visibility to these issues and work together to address them. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll stop there. Thanks, Wendy, for moving the slides along.
Thank you, Jeanette. That was very informative, and thanks for all the additional resources as well. And I see that they'll be shared, the slides will be shared afterwards with all participants. Now we're on to Dr. Geetha Mehta. She is no stranger to Together Women Rise. She is the founder of Asia Initiatives, which some of you may remember. It was a featured grantee in 2018. Geetha was also at our 2018 conference in Washington, D.C. Some of you may have met her there. Asia Initiatives works for women and their families in underserved communities in India to help improve livelihoods, education, and the environment. Geetha is the innovator of social capital credits, a virtual currency for social good that is empowering communities throughout the United States, India, and Kenya. Social capital credits won the World Changing Idea Award from the Fast Company and also prizes from MIT Solve and others. Geetha has been recognized by Women's E-News as one of the 21 leaders of the 21st century. Within weeks of the start of the pandemic, Asia Initiatives launched COVID resilience projects to employ jobless women, while also addressing water conservation and other environmental issues. Welcome, and I'll turn it over to you, Geetha.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's such an honor to be here for the organization that I really love and that has been so nice to us. So I'm going to share my slides. Please let me know when everyone can see them. Yes? Can everyone see the slides? Wonderful, thank you. So yes, at Asia Initiatives, although the name is Asia Initiatives, but we are working in many continents. And let me start with the first by telling you that in 2018, we received a grant from Together Women Rise, and it was for very low interest microcredit for poultry farmings. And we really built on that grant to do many things that I'm going to just briefly talk about. But the philosophy of our organization is that there are three types of wealth that have to be forefronted for the world to develop in a reasonable way. And right now, the focus is so much on financial capital that we think that it is depleting the ecological and social capital of communities. So we designed the social capital credits. It's a community currency for social good. It's very simple. You do acts of social good to help your own community, and you earn SOCs, social capital credits, and you spend them on your own education, upskilling, and healthcare. And it's completely bottom up in the sense that we hold Socratic dialogues and we have games that we've designed with communities. So communities for several days, they talk about what their needs are and what they are willing to do for it. And then they come up with the SOC earning and redeeming menu. And then we have the SOC platform and the app to help encourage, record, verify, trade, and analyze SOC activities. So all our work is evidence-based and we learn from our projects and go forward. So I mentioned the first grant we received from Together Women Rise. And then we took this idea to many, many places. We are in 27 projects in India and also in Kenya, just finished a project in Ghana and also in US. So in this particular project, these kinds of projects were really great to have during COVID, how hard it was, but still women had some money, some way of nutrition. So it was very helpful. So in this case, their socks were traded for very low interest microcredit in order to buy goats, so for goat rearing. In Ghana, as well as in Kenya and in India, we also stepped up on a kitchen garden project, which ensured the nutrition for people because so many people were day wagers and they lost their jobs. So having vegetables growing in your garden, which you can eat, which you can sell, was very helpful. And so we increased that project tremendously. The other key project we started was livelihood resilience for jobs lost during COVID. And this was to help with the providing livelihood. So at least people were getting some money, families were getting some money. Then the work was to build a rainwater harvesting and other infrastructure that was needed in the village, on which the villagers themselves voted on. And so this was our way to soften a bit the shock that, of course, having lost income caused to people. We had to upscale a lot our cascade of learning because the schools were closed. So this is a mentorship model so that older children and adults, they tutor somebody 3 years or more younger than them to make sure that they can continue their education. The schools were giving some homework, but it was really difficult for students to carry on. So this became like a one-to-one mentoring to provide educational support, but also emotional support. And so for doing that, the mentors were earning SOCs, and they could use SOCs for their own education or upskilling in terms of digital learning, English speaking skills. We had volunteers around the world. We had 32 volunteers that would get on Zoom from 8 a.m. in the morning and help students online with their work. So this was one of the projects. And a big challenge for us was also the lack of digital devices. So we, with SOCs, they were tradable for data cards, so people could get internet. And we transitioned from laptops to Raspberry Pis, which cost about 1/10 of a laptop, but can do pretty much all of the same things. And so we helped make neighborhood pods where students could get together, neighbors or extended families could get together, and the children could do their work. These are our young girls in Lucknow assembling Raspberry Pis. As I said before, so the data cards and tech devices helped pods of students to come together. This was certainly not perfect. There could have been much more, but given the resources we had and how much time we had, we tried to really rise up to this. The other project that we had been doing, but we really upscaled during COVID, was the cascade of upskilling. So in this particular project that I'm showing you, 550 farmers in Maharashtra, they learned about organic agriculture, including the system of rice intensification, which needs less water and less manual labor. And they will earn SOCs for teaching 1,100 farmers, who will then earn SOCs for teaching 2,200. And so the cascade goes. One thing that was consistent in all our projects before COVID was to bring women together into self-help groups. Many nonprofits around the world are doing it, but this turned out to be really a key in the COVID support we could provide to our people. So the self-help groups were mobilized. They already had their leadership structure, commitment of the women. So they actually really facilitated and expedited the distribution of food help, other help, knowledge about COVID, awareness, hand sanitizers, masks, and everything. So that became like a big force in their own communities, which was very helpful. So we are working in several countries around the world now and have received many awards, but I really have to thank Together Women Rise for giving us a strong fillip at the time we got the award. And so I will stop there and happy to answer questions, but the call to action is really listen to what Jeanette said and see the extent of the issues, which is really incredible that in this day and age, women should be so disproportionately disadvantaged. So yes, the call to action is to support in as many ways as you can, as many women-centered organizations that you can. So with that, I thank you all for being here and listening, and happy to answer questions later.
Thank you. That was very interesting. It was so wonderful to hear an update on what you've been doing, and you have been busy. Our next speaker is also from an organization that has received a Together Women Rise grant. At the end of 2021, you may remember we gave an impact partnership grant to Amplifygirls, a collective made up of 25 partner organizations in East Africa, all of whom are driving change and improving outcomes for adolescent girls and their communities. Aubryn Seidel is the global head of research for Amplifygirls. She also has another connection to Rise. From 2010 to 2016, she served as executive director of Age Africa, which is another one of our past grantees. At Age Africa, she built an innovative soft skills program aimed at improving girls' retention and achievement in secondary school in Malawi. Aubryn is going to tell us a bit today about the Back to School campaign that Amplifygirls launched to address the crisis in girls' education because of COVID. Welcome, Aubryn.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I am just going to share a brief presentation with you all. It's wonderful to be here today to talk about my work at Amplifygirls. It's a really innovative organization whose mission is to amplify the voices, work, and collective impact of community-driven organizations that are focused on investing in the power and potential of adolescent girls. So let me tell you a little bit about who we are. We are a collective, a self-governed collective of local leaders running community-based organizations in Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda. We were founded in 2018 by 18 of these community-driven organizations, or CDOs as we call them, who came together to advocate for local solutions on the global stage. As a network, we hope to present an alternative to scale and an example of what localization can look like. And today, Amplifygirls' 25 organizational partners are reaching over 60,000 girls across Eastern Africa. When the pandemic hit, our partners at Amplify felt it was really important to hear from girls themselves about their experiences. And this was really critical. We were seeing news reports coming from around the world, but especially in East Africa, about spiking rates of teen pregnancy, early marriages, and of course, the danger that all of the progress that Jeanette referred to around keeping girls in school before the pandemic would be lost. So we launched a study in 2020 with our partners in the early days, and actually went to their communities in 11 districts across these 4 countries to interview girls about their pandemic-related experiences. We interviewed 382 girls in focus group discussions and in-depth interviews. 108 of those were in-depth interviews with girls who reported to us that they would not be returning to school once schools reopened. 90% of those young women were pregnant. We learned some really striking things during this time that unfortunately confirmed what a lot of the news reports were saying. According to girls across our study cohort, girls dropout was indeed on the rise. And this is the primary pathway that they all referred to as why. That situations of economic hardship and increasing economic precarity that we know was the state of the world and continues to be the state of the world for so many vulnerable communities was actually forcing girls into situations of exploitation where they were engaging in transactional sex, often in exchange for basic needs goods. And in fact, the most frequently reported reason for engaging in transactional sex in our study cohort was for in exchange for menstrual hygiene products. And that, of course, these relationships were leading girls into unintended pregnancies and then dropout. But I think one of the most striking things that pregnant girls themselves told us was that the reason for their dropping out of school wasn't simply because they were pregnant. 100% of the girls in our study expressed an interest in continuing their education. The reason they were dropping out was because schools were simply not supportive of pregnancy and motherhood for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, because of the stigmatization they would face from both peers, faculty in their schools, and administrations in their schools at being young mothers or being pregnant. In one of our study countries, policies simply did not allow for girls to return to school after delivery. Some felt that they would be viewed as too old and feared Again, pure stigmatization. And nearly all of them expressed that there were simply no facilities at school to support lactation for young mothers or to support their health needs as pregnant women. And so for Amplify partners and all of us, this really speaks to a striking situation where we have a generation of young women who are also now mothers who simply do not have a pathway to continue their educations. So at Amplify, we wanted to translate this research into action. We've been working to raise a fund to support girls' school return. We have raised $280,000 of a $500,000 goal, and it's being dispersed 100% of it directly to community-based organizations who are either returning girls with scholarships back to secondary school or supporting young mothers in engaging in vocational training opportunities or other non-traditional education opportunities that will allow them to continue to gain skills outside the formal system when there is no access to the formal system. So I'll end with just a few quick stories from our impact in Uganda. Some of you may know that Uganda had the longest school closures of any country in the world. Schools closed in March 2020, along with everyone else, and didn't reopen until January 10th of this year. In the first 6 months in Uganda, the government reported 645,000 teen pregnancies in the first 6 months. And so we, as usually is the case with these things, we know that the real numbers were likely much higher than that. We have 4 local partners working in Uganda: Elohim Development Association, Girl Power Foundation of Uganda, the Girl Up Initiative Uganda, and Girls to Lead Africa. And collectively, they have provided over 100 scholarships to support girls to return to secondary education. And more than half of those are young mothers who are continuing with vocational training in a variety of professions, including tailoring, mechanics, entrepreneurship. And here are pictures of a few of the young women who have been supported with this initiative. So thank you all so much for caring about women's issues, especially in this time. I think I'm echoing my other panelists when I say that now is an important moment for investing in girls and women. We're seeing this everywhere in the world. And it's been my privilege to share with you a little bit of a snapshot of what's happening in the East Africa region. A call to action encouraging everyone to get involved and to do what you can to raise awareness and invest in these issues, no matter where you are in the world. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Auburn, very much. And now I have the pleasure of turning this over to Vina, who's going to moderate a panel discussion.
Thank you, Lynn. I just wanted to let all our panelists know, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. In a webinar, it's hard to see our RISE family, and maybe you haven't had time to look at the chat. So I wanted to make sure that I was telegraphing their joy and absolute happiness of your presence here. So we don't have that much time for a discussion, but let's go with what we've got. So I'm going to present this to you. As COVID-19 has ravaged communities across the world, right? Social protection was one of the most important parts of the SDGs. It's embodied in Goal 1, no poverty, right? That was where everybody was moving towards. But it was not just about the communities that were marginalized and at the bottom level. Everybody felt that they had lost a social contract with their governments. It's like nobody seems to know what the mandates are, the vaccines. So it's like everybody has felt let down in the past 2.5 years. So I wanted all of you to address the social protection issue and the social contract issue any which way you would like to. Jeanette, I'll go with you because you alluded to all the 17 SDGs. What can you add to our discussion?
Vina, you've really highlighted what I think the data reveals is that unfortunately, despite a lot of the rhetoric, right, that governments were expanding their investments in social protection, that they were, increasing the amount that they were, in terms of cash benefits that were going to families, et cetera. The reality is that oftentimes people were not receiving them, and the amount that they were receiving was too little actually to make a difference. again, when we ask countries, what are they doing? They identified this as being kind of a priority in terms of their response to the crisis. But we also interviewed women themselves. We conducted a survey in 45 countries and asked women and men, are you benefiting from any kind of social protection policies that came after kind of COVID-19 or in response to COVID-19? And a mere 10% of women on average said that they were receiving a pandemic-related cash relief from their governments. Women, single mothers with children, right? A very vulnerable group. Again, I talked about how when schools were closed, all of a sudden, you had to kind of address, the expanded kind of domestic responsibilities at home. And these women also were saying that they were not receiving any sorts of benefits from government. A little bit more than kind of women overall. It was a little bit higher in terms of about 12% said that they received it. But again, 10%, 12%. Really, the main story here is that not enough was being done. The other thing I want to say, because of course I'm coming from the perspective of data and research, is that even before the pandemic, we just don't know enough, right? Countries are not taking the data on social protection and disaggregating it by sex and age, by sex and household composition, so that we know who are you really reaching. When you're saying that you're expanding your policies, are they reaching vulnerable groups of women and girls? And are they making a difference in their lives? So let me just also say that one of the big things that I think, we've been saying at UN Women, but we hope that others are saying, because it needs to come from all stakeholders, is that we need more evidence, and that evidence needs to inform policies and policy priorities on the ground. And so just a big, shout out to kind of, more research and data on the lives of women and girls so that we can really inform policies. I'll stop there.
Absolutely. So Geeta, same question, social protection, social contract, but I wanted to add a little twist for you. Some of the COVID projects that Asia Initiatives was funding was actually addressing the populations that had gone back from the cities to the rural areas. Unfortunately, they also took COVID back to the rural communities. But it's almost like our governments of large countries like India abandoning rural communities. They are going where they can to get jobs where they can. So to reflect on that.
Yes, I think migrant population that had gone to cities to earn a living, really these are daily wage earners. They really had no social protections in the sense that of housing or any kind of health insurance or anything. So suddenly their daily wage job comes to a stop, and then they have no option but to go back to villages. You all must have seen pictures of thousands of people trekking back miles and miles to get to their villages. And once they came to the villages, there were huge issues, not just that they did not have money, but also because, as you know, they are living from hand to mouth. But also that, there were worries that, they are bringing in COVID, so their own village or their own family might be worried for that. And so there were mental issues, there were stress issues, and there was a loss of income issues. So the government, in the beginning, they did not really address this at all. But then eventually they did make cash transfers in the bank account of the oldest woman in the family, which is a program that has been going on in India for quite some time. And unfortunately, or fortunately, India had there was demonetization of big bills above 500 rupees. So the government had actually forced people to open bank accounts. So fortunately, people had bank accounts into which the money could come, except for people who were not registered. Those people were not registered in the city or in the village because they had been in the city when the village enumeration was done. So those people got left behind and had no social security net. So we actually identified those people with the help of the local leadership and our local partners. And those are the people we supported through the livelihood resilience and our other projects.
Absolutely. So Aubryn, same question, social protection, social contract, but a few things added on. And that is, in the old days, we said, you build the schools and they would come, right? And then a pandemic like this happens. And it's like, no, you need functional toilets, you need sexual reproductive health. But there's one thing you did bring up about vocational training for those who were kind of, in a sense, out of school. Are we losing the promise of education and schooling for these girls? Are we pushing them into the informal sector?
Such a great question. And I think the answer is that if we don't make schools, secondary schools, the formal system more inclusive for girls who are becoming mothers and girls who are pregnant, then the answer is yes. Many of our partners in a variety of countries are offering vocational training to young women who are also young mothers because there are no other options, because schools make it functionally impossible for them to return. Between lack of access to childcare, lack of ability to feed their infant children while they're in schooling because of the stigmatization that I spoke about before. So I think one of the things in the education sector, that the pandemic has really laid bare is that we must be doing a better job everywhere in the world for figuring out how we can make our formal education spaces more inclusive of young women and young mothers. So I think that for us is sort of a prime concern, and that is both about policy and ensuring that policies are supportive of girls' school return after pregnancy and childbirth. But the fact is that in 3 of our partner countries, those policies are there, and yet girls still felt it was impossible for them to return. So that speaks to a deeper set of issues about how we can support ministries of education, sure, but communities and school buildings themselves too, in policies and practices that are going to make it possible for girls to return to the formal system. We, across 25 local organizations, all of whom work with young mothers and pregnant teens, only had one organization that had figured out how to support girls in getting a formal degree, and they effectively had to do it outside the formal system. So thank you for your question. I think it's an important one.
Yes. In the very short time that we have left, I want to throw one more question to all of you, and maybe we can do this in rapid fire. Some of the innovations in policy, what can you think about? Geeta, you brought up this wonderful idea of having alternative digital technology so that people can access credit, whether it is loans or even education. I mean, I don't think the world has seen so much education going on tablets and cell phones and all these alternatives. So really quick, some innovative ideas. What do you think?
Yeah, I want to start actually by saying that nearly every issue in the world we think about, whether it's climate change, whether it is inequality, everything boils down to women's empowerment, everything, right? So if we just really focus and really push everyone to focus on that, like Jeanette said, every single SDG is benefited by empowering women, right? So what is the innovation? The innovation is to change gears for the whole world, to change gears and understand the absolute fact that if you empower women, you hit every single SDG and you change, like we do a lot of work in climate, for example, reforestation, rainwater harvesting, and who's doing it? It's the women. So I think forefronting women's empowerment, and also I think like Auburn also said, that economic empowerment is very, very important in this whole thing. If women are economically empowered, they don't have to do transactional sex, for example. So what is the innovation? I think it's a big change in gear, big change in the world realizing. I think that should be the innovation.
Absolutely. Aubryn, what about you? Any innovative idea? Building women's empowerment, of course, focusing on all 17 SDGs and?
I agree with Geeta. How could you not? I actually think it really underscores some work we've been doing at Amplifygirls around documenting girls' agency. So for us, and this really came from our community partners, when we asked them, what was the most important thing that you could do with young women? And it was universally across our partner cohort, they said, teach them to build their own agency. And so we've been doing a bunch of work around documenting girls' agency outcomes and trying to understand what kinds of programs are best at building girls' agency and improving girls' agency over time. So I would say, piggybacking on what Geeta said, invest in women's empowerment, invest in girls' empowerment and girls' agency, and more programs that do that work, and also invest in the local organizations doing that work, because women and girls are embedded in hierarchies of power and gender and patriarchy, and the organizations that need to be doing this work and leading this work are those that are on the ground.
Absolutely well said, Oberyn. Jeanette, I'm going to let you have the last word. Invest in women and girls, get the innovative policies out there. But what should governments and international agencies and the big players, what should they be focusing on?
Couldn't agree more. I really, it's challenging to go last because I think so much of what was said earlier resonates. We had a conversation last year with parliamentarians around the world, and we asked them, what are some innovative tools that you're testing out on the ground to make a difference? We presented something similar to what we presented today, right? The crisis and the impact on women and girls has been profound and it's been multi-layered, right? We've seen increases in violence. We've seen, bottlenecks in terms of access to family planning that are having real impact on education, et cetera. These things are interconnected. And those are the things that I kind of highlighted earlier, right? One policy, one intervention on its own is not going to make a difference. We need to understand that deprivations oftentimes cluster together, that those, who are marginalized in society oftentimes experience these kind of cluster deprivations in a very acute way. And policy response need to address this and need to recognize this. Parliamentarians, in terms of what they said to us, I'll take violence against women, for example. They said that they were opening hotels to accommodate women who had experienced domestic violence. They were creating additional hotlines to help victims of violence against women. And they were allowing abuse reporters to, allowing pharmacies to be a place where the report of abuse could be made. So there's some concrete examples of the types of innovations. The other thing that I thought was really interesting that came out in those conversations was that many countries were actually saying that in terms of addressing now and in the future, the kind of pay gap and the inequality in terms of opportunities, that they wanted to introduce laws that promoted wage transparency. Making sure that employers were transparent about the pay gap, et cetera. So anyway, concrete examples there that touch on different issues, because again, the challenges are large. The other thing I wanted to say, because it came out in something that Audrey was saying, right, is that we need to address kind of gender bias norms and address them early. Bring in boys and men and engage them in the home, in school, in society, work with community leaders to make sure that we address some of these issues like stigmatization that we heard earlier, but also other kind of gender biases that we see across society. And work with others to make sure that women's voices are being heard at all levels, right? And that they're part of the decision and a part of the solutions that we're looking at for addressing some of these challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You cannot see all our participants, but I wanted to thank you for a wonderful discussion. And thank you for reaffirming what Together Women Rise is doing. We have funded direct services for organizations through our featured grants for 19 years. And here we are on the cusp of trying to do something bigger and better, dealing with systems change, dealing with the root causes of gender inequality, talking about the norms that we need to change, working with larger organizations that work on policy, engaging men, all wonderful ideas. You've given us so much food for thought. Wendy, I'm going to stop there and let you bring in some questions from our members.
And I think what Wendy has said is we're going to move on now. Wow, what a fabulous hour. I echo everything that Veena has said, Oberyn, Jeanette, and Geeta. Just amazing. The information shared, the new ideas, and most of all, the inspiration and hope is just amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you from from myself and each member at Rise for all you do and keep doing. Now I end my role as MC and now become DJ. We're going to turn to the music portion of tonight's event. Joy Zimmerman is a very special friend of Together Women Rise. She's a member of a Rise chapter in Prairie Village, Kansas. She first collaborated with the Rise chapter on a fundraiser for Rise a few years ago. And soon, on March 24th, she'll be performing a benefit concert in Overland Park, Kansas, with all proceeds coming to Together Women Rise. Thank you so much, Joy, for that. Today, she is also donating 50% of the proceeds from the sale of each digital download of her latest album, The Canvas Before Us, to Rise. You can purchase the album from our website on the Marketplace page, and I really encourage you to do so. When you see this video in a moment, you're going to be really amazed. Joy is a dynamic folk and acoustic roots singer-songwriter whose songs resonate with humor, triumph, and humanity. Today, we're going to see the brand new music video. I think it's a premiere for Joy's song, Women Who Walk on Water, which highlights courageous women throughout history and present day. Before we play that, I welcome Joy to share a little bit about her commitment to Rise and the inspiration for this beautiful song.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It is just a delight and an honor to be with you all today. Thank you to Rise and to our amazing panelists for all their inspiration and information today. As a young girl, I loved reading biographies of courageous women like Harriet Tubman, Elizabeth Blackwell, and Amelia Earhart, etc. And I wondered if I could be so brave and resilient. And I think as we go through life, we keep gathering inspiration and hope. And I know we've all found a lot of that today. I am, as Lynn mentioned, a proud member of the Together Women Rise chapter in Prairie Village, Kansas. And each time we gather, I feel like it's the perfect blend of connection, education, and action. And so I love my involvement in Rise. And I am excited to premiere this video for you. The biggest problem I had when I was writing this song was that there's a finite number of women that I could include in this song. And I was thinking about all the women that had inspired me throughout my life. And I know that you have your own list, and I know that it grows longer all the time. And I encourage you to think about who you would include in a song if you were to write one. And so just an introduction to this song. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here to share today. And I hope moving forward that we all continue to be generous, that we all continue to bolster and challenge and inspire each other. And I hope you enjoy this video, Women Who Walked on Water.
Showed us the way, bringing change to the challenge of the day. Women who crossed rough waters did not turn away. They built hope in the struggles of the day. Thanks to Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, paving the way. Roosevelt, RBG, saving the day. Maria Talchi, Sojourner Truth, lighting the way. Jackie Joyner Kersey, Billie Jean King, rising above the fray. Each found a way, despite a steep divide, carrying others, walking side by side, resisting, writing, creating, uniting, working upstream to turn the tide. When Rachel Carson, Malala Yousafzai, saving the day. Thanks to Frida, Ella, and Aretha, lighting the way. Jane Goodall, Maya Lin, rising above the fray. For countless other sisters whose names we do not know, thank you, you're brave today and long ago. Women who walked on water showed us the way, bringing change to the challenge of the day. Women who crossed rough waters did not turn away. They built hope in the struggles of the day. May we be so brave to bring light in the darkness of the day. We've been shown the way. Let's bring change to this day.
Wow, Joy, that was amazing, truly amazing. So inspirational, so soothing, and just joyful. Thank you for your ongoing support of Rise and women and girls around the world. And thank you for such an impactful video around International Women's Day. Just perfect. Now, my thanks to each of you for being here this afternoon as we learn together. Joy referred to it as connection, education, and action. Our pillars at Together Women Rise, learning is, of course, one of the core action areas, along with giving and community building. In order for change to happen, we need more people to become aware of the barriers facing women and girls and how achieving gender equality can positively impact our entire world. If you're not already, I encourage you to get involved with Together Women Rise in whatever way works for you. Consider becoming a member in a chapter. Consider starting a chapter of your own. And we, of course, would love to see you at any and all of our virtual events. We have our monthly webinar on the first Thursday of each month, and then we have our book club throughout the year. Our next book club event is going to be on March 29th, and it'll feature the book Breath, Eyes, Memory with the author Edgewood Danticat as our special guest. Our website has all information about these events and, of course, other things and future events. One last thing, very exciting. On Tuesday, March 8th, the official International Women's Day, our co-founder, Barb Collins, and our communications and membership director, Wendy Fradlin, will be live on Juliet Hahn's podcast, Your Next Stop. You could be part of the live audience for that event or watch it on Facebook. Again, all details are on our website. And I want to thank you once again for joining us in this International Women's Day celebration and for your support of Together Women Rise. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend.